Welcome to another episode of the UX pattern series where we analyze useful, popular, and unique user experience patterns. You will gain a deep understanding of those UX solutions so that when it's time to design, you will know which one to select and how to apply it. You can explore the growing knowledge base of the UX patterns that I've created. It includes videos, descriptions, and examples. I'll link it in the description. Today we're going to talk about pop-ups, dialogues, popovers, and tooltips. Those four terms cause a lot of confusion when it comes to distinguishing between them and using them in particular situations. We will analyze them, their elements, what to pay attention to when designing them, and what are the common myths and misconceptions. All of the elements, pop-ups, dialogues, popovers, and tooltips are displayed on top of the interface, covering it entirely or partially. This is probably why they are so often misused and mislabeled. Let's start with a pop-up. It's a general term that refers to any temporary overlay that appears on top of main content or interface. On the Z-axis, pop-ups are above all other elements. They usually require user interaction or provide additional information, and they can come in many sizes from very small to full screen. Pop-ups can serve various purposes, including alerts, notifications, or even modal dialogues. We can say that all the remaining elements that we're going to talk about today, so dialogues, popovers, and tooltips, are included in this group of pop-ups. As I mentioned, pop-ups are included in the group called overlays. An overlay is a general term that refers to a layer or a graphical element that is displayed on top of the interface or content. To visualize it, let's start building our graph. We have overlays as a general term, and then we have pop-ups as a group inside of it. The main difference is that pop-ups serve a purpose of enabling interaction or providing information, whereas overlays include also purely graphical elements. Before diving deeper into various types of pop-ups, let's talk about some important characteristics they might have. We will be comparing them based on the following three aspects. First, let's talk about constraint focus. We differentiate modal and non-modal elements. The key difference lays in the level of interruption and interaction restriction. Modal elements demand user attention by blocking interaction with the remaining parts of the interface until task is complete. They interrupt the workflow, and they are the highest in the hierarchy when it comes to urgency and importance. They also have their own context, so people cannot access the underlying layer via regular or keyboard navigation. Non-modal elements allow users to interact with the interface without requiring immediate attention or interrupting their workflow. They do not impose context as modals do. In some design systems, you can encounter a component named modal. Usually they are referring to a modal dialog that we will talk about later in the video. In my opinion, it is a naming inconsistency because modality is a characteristic, not the name of the component. In some cases, pop-up elements have a backdrop. Usually it's an overlay with lowered opacity that signalizes that elements behind it are not available for the interaction. It helps keep people focused on the pop-up and avoid confusion when they try to interact with an underlying element. The third dimension to consider is how people dismiss the component. It can be via explicit dismiss or light dismiss. Explicit dismiss is when a component allows users to dismiss it, for example using the X icon, close button, cancel button, or escape key. Light dismiss is when a component disappears automatically under certain conditions. For example, user can scroll the page, they can click out of the component like with a popover menu, or they can hover out of the button that was triggering a tooltip. Now let's move on to dialogues. They are used to present information and prompt users to input data or make a decision. They usually include elements like text, form fields, select controls, and buttons. Dialogues are a type of pop-up. Let's add them to our chart as a group inside of the pop-up category. In many cases, we see modal dialogues that interrupt the workflow, but dialogues can be both modal and non-modal elements. If it's a modal dialogue, usually a backdrop is being used to lock people in the context of a dialogue, and of course, for non-modal dialogues, it is not needed. Dialogues usually have explicit dismiss, meaning that you can close them with the close button, the X icon, or the cancel button. Dialogues are extremely versatile. There is a long list of use cases. I've selected a couple of the most common ones to share with you today. Alert dialog. Alert dialogs display critical messages and notifications to the user. They typically require users to acknowledge the message by pressing a button like OK, I understand, or confirm. Here are some examples. Insufficient funds in your account, please add funds to proceed with the transaction. Your session has expired, please log in again to continue. That also can be confirmed with an OK button. You have exceeded your storage limit, please delete some files to free up space. Confirmation dialog. Confirmation dialogues are used to prompt the user to confirm or cancel an action before proceeding. They usually include text and buttons that allow users to choose between affirmative action, like save changes, or negative action, like don't save. Here are some examples. Are you sure you want to delete this item? This cannot be undone, and users can choose between cancel and delete. Do you want to save changes before closing? And users can choose between save, don't save, and cancel. Are you sure you want to unsubscribe from this service? And available buttons are unsubscribe and keep subscription. Prompt dialog. Prompt dialogs are used to request user input by presenting a message and providing an input field or options to select from. They can be very simple, like changing password dialogs, where we have two inputs for entering a password and repeating it, and then confirm and cancel buttons. Or complex, like a dialog for creating a new event in Google Calendar that displays multiple options. It is an interesting example for a couple of reasons. It's non-modal. Most of the dialogs out there take user out of context. This one doesn't block interaction with the rest of the interface. We can dock it to the left side of the screen, but it doesn't convert into a panel. It still remains a dialog, it's just anchored to the left side. In addition, we can click More Options button, and the dialog converts into a full screen dialog and becomes a modal element because we cannot interact with underlying elements anymore. Share dialog. A share dialog is a specific type of dialog that allows users to share content or collaborate with others by inputting their emails or selecting users. Share dialog in Google Docs is quite complex. There is an input for emails, general access options, and copy link button. If we select a person, the context changes so that we can add a message and select the role. This dialog has its own context and navigation. We can come back using the back arrow or even select the settings icon and adjust document settings. As I mentioned, there are multiple contexts in which dialogs can be used. In addition to the examples that we've analyzed, there are also other very popular patterns, from simple ones like login, sign-up dialogs, save as dialogs, to more complex ones like print dialog for a document with all the necessary setting, or export dialog for a spreadsheet. The next element we're going to analyze is the popover. A popover is a small overlay that appears close to a UI element. It is usually triggered by interaction with this element, like clicking on it or hovering over it. Popovers usually display information, actions, or options that people can choose from that are related to the triggered element. Popovers are a type of pop-up. They are on the same level as dialogs and other elements like notifications, alerts, and lightboxes. Popovers are typically non-modal. They don't block interactions with the elements that are below them on the z-axis. They also usually don't use backdrop because it wouldn't make sense to dim the elements that are still active. Popovers use the light dismiss, meaning that the popover will disappear if a user clicks out of it or they hover out of the element that triggered it. Now let's take a look at some examples. First, we have a popover menu. It presents a set of options in a really compact way. It usually appears after an interaction with a trigger element, such as button or an icon. It is designed to be unobstructive and contextually relevant to the triggering element. In Google Docs, popover menus are used to select font and text style. In Type AI, we can use a contextual menu to move elements around. Color Picker. It offers users a visual interface to select colors for design or customization purposes. It usually offers a couple of mechanisms like sliders, color palettes, or input fields. In Asana, we can choose a color for every custom option using a predefined color palette with swatches. Figma uses an advanced color picker with color spectrum, palettes, and input fields for different formats. Date Picker. It allows users to select a specific date. They usually offer a calendar view that we can navigate through and input fields for date and sometimes either time. Asana uses a very simple date picker. I can select the date range or input the values manually. I can also choose to add time. It is really well designed and very intuitive, especially when it comes to the hover states, because if I hover over a date, it is showing me the date range that I'm about to select. A similar example that I would like to show you for the sake of comparison is a date picker from Notion. The logic here is the same, the only thing that is different is the hover state. So if I hover over a date, it just highlights this date that I'm about to select, not the whole new date range. And it requires a little bit more attention from me as a user, which makes it a little bit more difficult. And you can see that this is an excellent example of how Asana makes the user experience better with this simple change in the hover state. Another example of a popover is a tooltip, and that brings us to the last element for today. Tooltips are in the group of popovers, and they are used to display additional information about the specific element on the screen. Tooltips are usually triggered by hovering over an element or tapping on it. They display contextual information, for example, the purpose of a button. They are non-modal, so they don't disrupt the user flow. They usually don't use a backdrop, and they disappear if you move the cursor away from the triggering element, so it's a light dismiss. A classic example of a tooltip is when you hover over a button, and after a short delay, a text explaining its functions appears, like in the Commands button in Type AI. A slightly different example would be to provide more details on hover, like in the case of Share button in Asana, where we can see an overview of sharing settings that are currently implemented. Because of that, people don't have to open the Share dialog to get this information. Now that we know the difference between Popups, Dialogs, Popovers, and Tooltips, let's take a look at how different design systems treat those elements and what naming conventions they use. I need to warn you that we will have a lot of inconsistencies when it comes to naming and grouping. Let's start with material design, one of the most popular design systems created by Google. In the components section, we can see all of the elements that we talked about today listed separately. There is no group that they are in part of. Dialogs. Following the definition, dialogs can require an action, communicate information, or help users accomplish a task. There are two types of dialogs, basic and full screen. Next, we read that a dialog is a modal window that appears in front of app content to provide additional information or ask for decision. And it means that this design system doesn't really allow non-modal dialogues, which is really interesting because earlier in this video, we've analyzed the Google Calendar case of the non-modal dialog for creating an event. It means that the Google team maybe doesn't recognize that element as a dialog, or maybe it's a special case. Moving on to anatomy, we can see standard elements like title, content, message or input fields, and at least one button. In the menus category, we see a popover menu that is displayed after users' interaction with a trigger, so button for example. It displays a list of options to choose from. Date pickers are also listed as a separate component. They are defined because of their function, so choosing the date, not necessarily because of their structure. They can come in the form of popover on desktop and of modal dialog on mobile. Lastly, we have tooltips. This design system differentiates between plain and rich tooltips. Plain tooltips display static information about a UI element. Rich tooltips, on the other hand, provide more detailed context, like for example, explaining a value of a feature. Optionally, they can have a title, link, or a button. In summary, according to the classification that I've showed you earlier, we would categorize rich tooltips as simply popovers. In Apple's human interface guidelines, components are organized according to their high-level function, layout and organization, menus and actions, navigation and search, etc. Within those groups, we could find multiple elements that we could potentially classify as pop-ups, dialogs, popovers, and tooltips. We see different types of popover menus: context menus, doc menus, edit menus, and general menus. They all provide functionality related to triggered element without blocking other elements of the UI. Then there are popovers. We read that a popover is a transient view that appears above other content where people click or tap a control or interactive area, and that we should use a popover to expose a small amount of information or functionality, and that aligns perfectly with our definition. We also see the color well, so a popover color picker. It is included in the selection and input section together with other components like text fields, pickers, toggles, etc. We don't have a strong differentiation of a dialog element in Apple's guidelines. The assumption is that a designer would choose a correct layout from layout and organization section and then add elements from input and selection. In addition to components, we can also read the modality page in patterns section. It talks about good practices when it comes to presenting information in a focused state. It feels like Apple has more high-level approach to how they've structured the documentation for their design system. It is not very prescriptive, which may be an issue when it comes to creating designs because it doesn't really give you more freedom, it just makes you more confused. And the last design system that I would like to show you is Polaris by Shopify. In this case, we have a section called Overlays that includes elements like Model, Popover, and Tooltip. You can see that naming is slightly different to what we've discussed earlier in this video because they don't call them pop-ups, they call them overlays. We read that overlays display contextual elements on top of the main admin interface that provide additional information or functionality. Modals require users to take action before they can proceed, and this is an example of this naming inconsistency that I've mentioned earlier in the video. So modality is a characteristic, so instead of calling them modals, I would rather call them modal dialogs. Now let's take a look at the definition of a popover. Popovers are small overlays that open on demand. They let merchants access additional content and actions without cluttering the page, and it aligns perfectly with our definition before. And lastly, we have tooltips that are floating labels that briefly explain the function of a user interface element. They can be triggered by hovering, focus, tap, or click, and that aligns perfectly with our definition as well. As you can see, teams who create design systems adjust the naming convention and structure to their individual needs. It's really common to put dialogs, popovers, and tooltips as separate elements, as separate components, without necessarily grouping them as pop-ups, and there is nothing wrong with that. As designers, we should know the underlying structure, but there is no need to stick to it religiously when working on our design system. It should first of all serve us as a team when it comes to velocity, speed of work, and usefulness. In summary, today we've explained the differences between 4 commonly confused terms: pop-ups, dialogs, popovers, and tooltips. Pop-up is a generic term that refers to any temporary overlay that appears on top of the content or the UI. In the group of pop-ups, we can see smaller groups of patterns like dialogs and popovers. Dialogs require user interaction or input, and popovers provide additional information and actions. Tooltip is a type of popover that provides static information about a UI element. I hope that this video clarified the meaning of those terms, when to use which element, and how they are treated in different design systems. Don't forget to click the subscribe button so you don't miss out on future videos from the UX pattern series. And also check out the knowledge base that I've linked in the description. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you soon.